Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah's Chagigah, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah 3. Okay. Eichlim achlim neguvin beyadayim b'sei avos patruma. I'm going to translate the words. We may eat dry food with impure hands for truma, avaloi b'kodesh, but not when it comes to sacrifice meat. Now, what that means is like this. Let me read to you here from the notes how they explain it. Someone who could not put truma in his own mouth because his hands were tamei, had another person do it for him. Okay, so what's happening here is he wants to eat truma, but his hands are impure. Like we've mentioned, there are certain situations by rabbinic impurities. If your hand touches certain things, your hands will become impure. If your hands are impure, they have the status of a sheni, of a second degree tuma, second degree acquired tuma. Now, if those hands were to touch truma, you'd invalidate the truma, you wouldn't be able to eat it. So you've got this kohen, he's hungry. He only has truma. His hands are impure, so he needs to eat. So he says to his friend who has pure hands, could you please put the truma in my mouth? Okay, and he does. He puts the truma in his mouth. Now, you can't just eat plain truma, right? You need to have an onion with it, right? You need to have a radish with it, right? You gotta have some kind of a condiment, right? To come along, all right? Now, this condiment is chulin, right? It's not sanctified food. So we said, but we've learned previously that a sheni cannot make unconsecrated food impure, which means that this kohen whose hands are impure, right? That's the case. He wants to take the radish. The radish is not going to become impure because the radish is chulin. It's perfectly fine. And he wants to pop in his mouth. Any problem? The halacha is no. There's not a problem. When it comes to truma food, if that is what you want to do, you now want to take now your tamei hands, touch the radish, which is regular food, and now pop it in your mouth together with the truma, no problem. The truma didn't become tamei from the hands. The radish isn't tamei from the hands. And as we say, eskas and hate, enjoy your meal. One thing that's important to know is the following, and this is added by the Bartanura, they bring down here, and that is, the Mishnah emphasizes, the Mishnah said it was achelim neguvin, dry food, not wet food, not moist food. And there's a reason for that. The Mishnah emphasizes that only dry food may be eaten by someone who has truma in his mouth. Because when a sheni touches any liquid, the liquid becomes a rishon under rabbinic law. Meaning, we've mentioned this a couple of times before. We'll have to wait for a couple of years from now when we get back to Taharis to get this more in detail or more explicit. But the Rabbanan said that if a sheni, second degree tuma, touches liquid, typically nothing should happen to that liquid. But for a liquid, the Rabbanan made a decree that it becomes tamei, the liquid. Even though it was touched by a second degree hand, it becomes tamei. Not only does it become tamei, it becomes a rishon. No matter what touches it, whether it's a rishon or a sheni, it becomes a rishon. Now, if let's say this food, now which food are we referring to here, right? If the sheni touches liquid on wet chulin food, right? Let's say the radish was wet, and now the sheni touched the wet radish, the liquid on the radish becomes impure. Now, if you put that radish in your mouth with the truma, it's going to touch the liquid's going to touch the truma, make the truma impure. So therefore, the halacha of the Mishnah, what the Mishnah taught us is it can only be dry food. If the chulin food, if the radish is dry, then you can take it with the impure hands and put it in your mouth and eat it with the truma. But if it's going to be that that chulin food was wet. So now the impure hands made the liquid wet. That liquid is going to make the truma wet when it goes into the person's mouth. And therefore the Mishnah is specifically talking about where the food was dry. Got it? Good. Next. Ha'oinein u'mechusar kippurim. Ein oinein. An oinein is a person upon the death of any of one's 7 closest relatives, father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, or spouse. A person enters a state called aninus, which lasts until the burial, and he's known as an onain. An onain is biblically forbidden to partake of kodesh until nightfall on the day that death occurs. What was I going to say? Right. So an onain cannot eat kodesh. He cannot eat carbon meat. It's something else he also can't eat. He can't eat meiser sheni. But he can eat truma. And that makes a very big difference. Ha'onain mechusar kippurim. An onain and a person who is mechusar kippurim. Mechusar kippurim means there are people that in order to become completely pure, not only does the cause of their tumah have to go away, and not only do they have to go to the mikveh, not only does, there's some people that not only, even after going to the mikveh, even after waiting to the nighttime, they cannot become completely pure until they bring a sacrifice the next day. Okay? Now, a mechusar kippurim is also a person cannot eat carbon meat. That's really what the carbon is waiting for. The carbon is what allows him to eat carbon meat. That means he's completely pure. So both these people, the onain and mechusar kippurim, they cannot eat carbon meat. A mechusar kippurim who touches carbon meat invalidates it. Okay, that's the law by mechusar kippurim. Right, he can't even touch it. Now, so the onain, he's done. Aninus is over. Right, the period of aninus is over. Right, he can eat carbon meat now, but there was a point of time that he wasn't allowed to. The mechusar kippurim brought his carbon. He can now eat carbon meat, but there was a point of time that he can't. Because of that, tzrichen tevila lakodesh. They have to go to the mikveh again before they eat the carbon meat. Because even now, avoloi l'truma, but not when it comes to truma. Truma is different. Truma, he was allowed to eat. The owner was allowed to eat the truma. The mechusar kippurim was allowed to eat the truma. As long as he went to the mikveh, and the night already passed, and the night came, the Chaim can eat the truma, even if he didn't bring his karbanos yet. So being that by truma, he wasn't forbidden to eat it in these states, so now he doesn't need to go to the mikveh before he eats it. But when it comes to the carbon meat, both the onain and mechusar kippurim are now allowed to eat it, and therefore they cannot eat until they go to the mikveh. Now, let me read to you how they explain it. All right. Since the onain and mechusar kippurim knew that he could not eat kodesh anyway, he might have unthinkingly allowed himself to become tameh. The sages therefore decree that whenever someone becomes permitted to eat kodesh, he must first immerse in a mikveh. So that means that this person, why does he have to go to the mikveh for? What are we concerned about? We're concerned about the fact that, while he can't anyway do these things, he can't eat a carbon meat anyway, he might not be so careful about watching himself from not becoming tameh. Now, since on the other hand, an onain and mechusar kippurim are in fact permitted to eat truma, there is no reason to require them to eat before eating truma. As mentioned above, the Mishna discusses an onain. But the people, regarding truma, could I eat the truma? I could eat the truma. So I know I can eat truma. I'm going to be very careful to make sure I don't become tameh. But by kodesh meat, where we anyway are always stricter, there we're going to kind of go a step further and be concerned that perhaps because he couldn't eat it then anyway, he wasn't as careful that he should have been. And therefore, the rabbinic sages decreed that before eating the carbon meat, it's got to go to the mikveh, but before eating truma, he doesn't have to go to the mikveh. But when he was an onain mechusar kippurim, he was allowed to eat truma. When he was an onain mechusar kippurim, he couldn't eat the carbon meat, and therefore, before he actually eats it, even after these periods are over, he has to go to the mikveh. Okay, no Chofetz Chaim. All right. One is not allowed to speak about his friend, even not in front of him, and even though it's true. Something that will cause him to be disgraced because of it, or will cause him to have suffering from it. And of course, we're talking about if you're saying, derogatory things about him, which meaning derogatory things that aren't his fault. meaning he didn't do anything wrong. Going liskar alav ma'isa avaisav ukarayvav liskar ma'isa rishainim bein shoyu devarim shebein adam lamakim and devarim shebein adam lachaveirei. You're talking about, I remember when you used to do this, or I remember when he used to do that, or I remember when his father belonged to the mafia, something like that. But he doesn't anymore. So we're talking about you're just going ahead and putting him down about things that he's not responsible for, or he stopped doing these things. Okay? Being that now he himself is behaving properly, you cannot put him, you cannot degrade, you cannot defame him, you can't speak badly about him. That's unquestionably lashon hara. You saw somebody do something that was wrong. There's no question, it was wrong. And we're talking about matters between a man and God. Because when it comes to matters between man and his fellow Jew, there's a lot of other distinctions and details. Okay, but again, the focus right now is you saw him do something wrong, you know it's wrong, and it's the kind of an aver of a sin that goes to the category of bin adam lamakim, between man and his fellow Jew. Shabbos, kashrus, whatever it may be. Okay, just because you saw him do something wrong doesn't give you the right to go ahead and to speak bad about him. Unless we're dealing with details and circumstances that will be discussed later. So the starting point of this new chapter of the Chofetz Chaim is going to be discussing, you saw the person do something wrong. It's wrong. Finished. It's wrong. Does that mean you can go ahead and speak about him because that he did something wrong? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. The starting point, the assumption should be no, unless there are going to be other details discussed later that will be discussed, but this is now going to be the focus of this chapter. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.